Remember the button. There we go. Okay. Welcome, everyone. So Michael's going to put a link in the chat for our landing site for today. I'm so glad to see you all here this evening. And before we start our session, I did want to take a moment just to make some comments. We know, obviously, you've been watching the news, and so it's a little tough out there right now, just a smidge. So I did just want to make some remarks before we start. I am going to apologize now. We know we're educators, we get a little emotional. So I'm apologizing now, but I'm also owning it and creating that space. We're here together. So I did just want to say, before we start our session this evening, I wanted to make sure that we took a moment to acknowledge the devastating news of the 14 students and the one educator at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. See, I'm already getting choked up. So while we know, and I wrote these down so I could get through them. While we know thoughts and prayers are not nearly enough during these challenging times, and at our core, we believe that schools need to be sacred places for our students and educators to feel safe and be able to focus on the joy of learning. And on that note, I'm already in cheers. Love you all. While we still decide to host our session for today, it's not without a heavy heart, but also in the spirit of community and feeling the support of those around us. So please do not hesitate to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself throughout the session. Go off camera, take a minute, whatever you need. And I'll just model that for us today. So just wanted to make sure we acknowledge that as we start today. And but I'm glad that you're all here. Glad that you have a space to be with others who are in this in these crazy times. And on that note, we are going to dive into our program, and you'll see I'll switch back over to my presenter. This is the Natasha, mom of 10-year-olds, former elementary teacher. And I'm going to switch back over to my PD persona over here to get us through today. But I did want to take a moment just to acknowledge that, because it is important to know that we keep track of what's happening in society today. Okay. And on that note, I'm gonna switch off the tears. Okay, we're ready. Tears are done. We're gonna switch over, and we'll edit that out of the recording later. Don't worry. But on that note, remember, take care of yourself. You need to turn off your camera. Don't worry. I don't take it personally. I'm used to talking into a room of just screens. And if you have your camera on, even more love. But we're going to have a great session today. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. I'll just edit out the tears, Julianne. We'll see. Don't worry, I didn't put on the makeup for us, just for that reason today. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and get us started. And let's see if we select the right screen here. Hopefully we've got the right one. And as I mentioned, I'm a former elementary teacher. So when I default to my elementary management skills, sorry, it's by nature. So if you can see the screen, just give me a thumbs up so I know that we are on board. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And those of you who are joining us for the first time today, as I mentioned before, Michael did put a landing page into our chat for today. This landing page is going to be where we interact throughout the session. It just gives us a space to write down questions. I know sometimes that chat box moves really, really fast, and then you can't keep track of it. So as you see, the slides are in here for today. No secret, they're in there. Sometimes it's nice to go back and look at something again. And we'll start with today. We always love to know where everyone is from. And I will turn on those transcripts. With our map here, this is actually a map of everyone who's participated in these conversations. So go ahead and you can add yourself onto our map for today. If you click on the plus sign in the top right-hand corner, it's just great to see how many people are really engaging in this conversation as we think about how are we continuing to strengthen history and civic instruction for all of our students across the country. So that is right there. Go ahead and add yourself to the map. If you're a returning participant, please challenge yourself and change your color. It's always fun to see if we have some different colors and see people who've been here for many times. This is like your Padlet expert over here. Now you get to change the color. Have fun. And introductions, I saw some of you throwing introductions into the chat. Please also take a moment and introduce yourself on our Padlet. The same thing, you're going to click on the plus sign and it'll give you a text box to write in. And on the Padlet for today, let us know your name, your organization, and how you make connections between the United States and the global community in your classrooms. And just give me a minute. Just also to acknowledge, you'll find throughout today's session, sometimes there'll be times when you might still be finishing a thought on a Padlet. That's the joy of it. Take your time, add in your thoughts. Even if I return back to the slides, you still have time to write. This is the joy that the chat isn't going to lose you. Don't worry. Okay, and on that note, I'm just going to adjust my screens for a moment. So as I mentioned, we have our landing page for today. If you ever lose it, just put the request in the chat. My amazing colleague, Michael, will jump in and throw that link down there. You'll also see that throughout the session, Michael will sprinkle links into the chat as well, just so that you can easily see what we're talking about and what we're referencing. For those of you who need documentation for today's webinar, we do keep track of the Padlets, so just make sure you're responding on the Padlets and complete the exit ticket at the end of the session. Then we'll send you an email when we're done that just documents how that you participated in the session and the amount of time. And I will also say, even if you don't need some sort of recognition for the hours, also just to give us feedback. We want to make sure that we continue to improve these sessions each time. So feel free to give us feedback in the exit ticket too, even if you don't need the letter, it's okay. And for those of you who haven't followed us on social media yet, you can follow us at EAD Roadmap and hashtag EAD Roadmap, just to stay current in terms of what's going on with all of the organizations that have come together. So join the conversation, you can continue it there. Or if you find something really interesting in today's conversation, feel free to share it on social media too. And those of you who have been here, you know my spiel. I'm going to spend a little bit of time going just an overview of EAD high level, and then we're going to turn it over to my amazing colleagues at iCivics and the Council for Foreign Relations. We have an educator with us this evening, Shannon, so it's going to be a great session. And for those of you who have heard this same spiel before, take a minute, relax, get a drink of water, but you should be EAD experts by now. And so since there are some of us that are new, we're gonna jump right in. So, and if you need earlier recordings, we can also throw in those links too, so that you can watch some of the earlier sessions if you'd like, because this is session 7. So when we think about EAD and introduce EAD, Educating for American Democracy, it is funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Department of Education. And the whole initiative was led by Circle, iCivics, the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University, and the Jonathan Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University. One of the other aspects of this project and of this work, there's been over 300 contributors in the development of the EAD roadmap and the pedagogy companion. And that is core, because this is where we had so many people invested in the work come together, have a conversation, and continue to improve it. And as we think about what is EAD, the EAD roadmap is an inquiry-based content framework that provides guidance for excellence in civics and history education for all learners. Yet, since the roadmap is a framework and not a curriculum or a mandate, it provides states and districts the flexibility to use the roadmap to deliver excellent history and civic learning that leads into essential discussions around topics like reflective patriotism. And it also encourages a telling of America's plural yet shared story and a more complete and honest accounting of the past, both the good and the bad. So in just a moment, we'll dive into one of our themes and give you a little more overview of how they're organized. Now, when we think about EAD, we have three core documents that are really the foundation. So we have the EAD report, which contains the theory, the rationale, and the general approach and thinking behind the roadmap. We have the EAD roadmap itself, which contains 7 themes, and each of those 7 themes is scaffolded across 4 grade bands. So it works K-12, which is fabulous for vertical alignment. And then finally, we have our pedagogy companion, which describes the 6 pedagogical core principles. And we'll look at just a couple today. Now, in today's conversation, as we think about making connections and understanding the US and the American people in a global context, we're really diving into theme number 6, a people in the world. Now, as I mentioned before, with inquiry at its core, the roadmap provides multiple layers of questions to guide conversations and instruction that gradually become more focused. So we have our design challenges, which really focus on those dilemmas and history and civics content. We then go down to content themes. We have some thematic questions, always from a historical and a civic perspective. We have driving questions, and then we have sample guiding questions. And we can think of those, and they keep getting more specific as they progress farther down. And then finally, as we think about those 5 design challenges, today our theme is really connected to design challenge number 5, balancing the concrete and the abstract. And I'll show you the language for that design challenge in just a moment. And if you want to explore some of the other design challenges, Michael did put in the chat, we do have an interactive roadmap on the EAD website, which is amazing because then you can actually toggle back and forth, see the different themes, see the different design challenges, and begin to make those connections. So if you haven't gone and played yet, I'm warning you now, it's going to be like a little treasure trove of information. You're going to get a little lost because it's just so exciting. And so as we think about design challenge number 5, balancing the concrete and the abstract, really having us think about how can we support instructors to helping students move between concrete, narrative, and chronological learning and thematic, abstract, or conceptual learning. So as we think of these pieces and we think of that kind of tension that we see back and forth with, are you taking a chronological approach to teaching your history and civics content? Are you taking a thematic approach to teaching this content? And as we think about this, the EID roadmap really braids historical concepts and content with civics in every grade level. And you see this chronological and thematic connection happening constantly. And though the roadmap is organized thematically, it encompasses both chronological specific content and scaffolds core historical skill of thinking in time. So we see this constantly going back and forth throughout our roadmap. The other piece, and we have an excavation archaeology. Whenever I think of depth versus breadth, I always think archaeology. So of course I had to go digging in the Library of Congress. I know. But with archaeology, and as we think about this concept of depth versus breadth, really seeing how EAD emphasizes the importance of going deeper in content and making connections across different perspectives. Lots of times we're used to rushing across content and just skimming the surface. But what EAD is really pushing us to do is actually grapple with some of those tensions that we see in history. And that's what the design challenges help us frame, but really help us grapple with some of those tensions in history and see how we get to that deeper understanding and that deeper learning rather than just skipping across the top. And whenever I think about depth versus breadth, it's always archaeology, going deeper. I think about how we keep digging deeper to uncover more and more layers. And I will say, just for fun, I will say my first archaeological picture I was looking for was a privy, just the layers. It's always the favorite spot of the archaeologist. So thinking about that is just something that brings a smile to my face as we think about how we engage in this content and just continue to go deeper. Now, so we have those 5 design challenges really pushing at that tension, really pushing us to go deeper into content, not just stay at the surface. But alongside those 5 design challenges, we have the 7 roadmap themes that really help us rethink and reprioritize what goes into our curriculum, allowing you to develop an educational plan that holistically teaches the full complexity of American history and civics in a way that is more deeply engaging to your student population. And that's really the flexibility that we love within the roadmap, being able to make it relevant and localized to your community. So as I mentioned before, it's organized by 7 themes across 4 grade bands, and the roadmap gradually dives deeper into concepts by anchoring each theme with 2 overarching thematic questions, one from civics, one from history, and then those 7 content themes map out disciplinary and conceptual terrain, as well as the skills and dispositional learning that needs to happen to support a healthy civic participation. And as we think about our theme today, or the 17th overall, I'll give you the quick rundown. I'm not going to read the long version of all of them, but just giving you the quick overview. We start with exploring what it means to participate in our American constitutional democracy. Then we continue in themes 2 and 3, where we're examining how the American constitutional democracy came to be, the places and people of which it consists, how shared political institutions emerge, how and have transformed and how they operate now. Then we continue to think about the diverse array of benefits and harms that have been brought by those institutions, the place, this is where we are today, the place of the US in the world more broadly, and finally, the ongoing debates that characterize contemporary American civic life, as well as the possibilities available to us now. So as we think about that today, we're really focusing in on the people in the world. And as we think about this theme, really having us dive into thinking about that connection, thinking about what does it mean to be a nation among nations? Okay, how do American constitutional principles influence the conduct of foreign policy? And as we get into some of our examples today, with Convene the Council game from iCivics, our newest game, very excited, always excited to highlight it, and our colleagues and partners over at the Council for Foreign Relations and the amazing resources that they bring. So as we think about this, thinking about how these different elements really push us to think about the influence in foreign policy in all of these different elements. Each of our themes also have key concepts. These key concepts are fabulous because then you can actually see that vertical alignment from K-12. As I mentioned before, former elementary teacher before shifting to K-12 environment. And when we think about how are we setting the foundation in K-5 to then progress into 6-12, how are we setting that foundation of having our students examine our freshman here, examine the causes and consequences of US cooperation, conflict with other nations, okay, developing the capacity to see international conflicts and their consequences from multiple perspectives. So we start at this level, just starting to raise awareness, and then shifting to more discrete and critical analysis in 6-12. And as I mentioned before, we have so many levels of questions with our EAD roadmap. Now, these questions that I'm showing you here are our driving questions. And what I want us to do is just take a moment as we look at these driving questions and think about how these driving questions really, help us create that vertical alignment across K-12, but also help us push our thinking and how we're pushing our students to think about the US and the relationship with the world. So we can see in K-2, where we start with how and why has the United States interacted with other nations and regions of the world? How do people make sense of other cultures in the world? Really just starting to raise that awareness. As we then continue in 3-5, all the way through 9-12. I love when I press the button and they all come up, but that's fine. So in 3-5, thinking about how have nations cooperated in the past? What are the costs and benefits of cooperation? How do we work together with and against other nations? Okay, starting to feel that tension from a historical perspective. Also then thinking about why do countries trade? So thinking about where are those economic connections that we start to see, and what does the idea of national interest mean? So we see these concepts getting gradually more complex as they progress from kindergarten through 12th grade. And when we get into our high school grade and our high school band here, thinking about How and why has the US acquired its power and influence in the world? And how should the US exercise its power and influence, and why? What limits and what invoking what ideas? So as we think about this complexity, thinking about how do we see this in our curriculum now? And where do these questions start to push us a little bit to incorporate more of these concepts of foreign policy into our work? So I've been talking for a really long time. What I would love for you to do is take a moment, and you're actually going to go to our now we're like Padlet number 3 or 4. We're going to scroll down. There we go. We're at number 2, making connections to our EAD design challenges and themes. And take a minute and to respond, how can understanding the place of the United States in a global context impact student learning? And also, based upon what we've seen so far with the questions, how can the EAD roadmap deepen student thinking? And so take a minute, jot down your ideas into that Padlet. Joseph, this presentation is actually already embedded right at the top. I'm going to make everyone a little seasick just for a moment. But the slides are actually embedded already at the top of the site. So you can find it there. And don't tell anyone, but all of the sessions at the top of the screen have all of the slides from previous sessions too. So you can find it all. But I'll give you just a moment to think about that, and just to save your brains, because I know toggling between a couple of windows is always hard. I'm going to bring up our questions again, just so that you have them and you can view them. So I'll give you just a moment to do that. While you're doing that, I'm going to scroll through the chat, see if I've missed any questions. I see David is posing a great question. Still have another minute or two to jot down your ideas. David's posing a great question. How do we connect these guiding questions to our core curriculum? And will these questions be saved someplace for future review? So we do have all of our questions and the roadmap on the EAD, Educating for American Democracy.org website. So all of the questions are all available there. These are just copies of them just to focus us for today's discussion. So that'll all be available there. And that question, for those of you who are returning to our EAD sessions, if you have any recommendations and even just any ideas of how you're starting to connect these EAD driving and supporting questions to your curriculum, planning for this year, your lessons, your units, or even for next year, feel free to share those thoughts in the chat. Okay, so as we have more people hopping in, we'll just make sure they all get in. And so we have some great ideas and great thinking here. It just broadens their understanding of the world. We see helping them understand that even though we're in the US, we have some comments here around understanding their peers. Many of our students are actually immigrants in the classroom. Teaching in global context honors their story, culture, and life experiences. Wonderful. Students need to think globally in order to act locally with a more open mind. I love that connection between our global context and our local context. Wonderful. And if we're continuously doing that in the classroom, that's exactly where we need to be. And for those of you who are just joining us, Michael is putting our landing page in the chat. You can read your colleagues' thoughts and ideas as we go there, but I'm actually going to stop sharing. Well, we're going to go over the 6 core pedagogical principles quickly, just because they're my favorite. Sorry, bias over here about that. But the 6 core pedagogical principles, really the quick and dirty of this is these 6 core pedagogical principles really set the foundation of what we need to think about to be an EAD teacher and to have an EAD classroom. Really thinking about with core principles 1, 2, and 3, how are we setting up the learning environment and the learning environment and the dispositions that we need in order to engage in those really rich inquiries and those practices of constitutional democracy. Oftentimes we just want to get into the rigor, get into the inquiry, but we forget to acknowledge that we have to make sure that the learning environment and the foundation is established first before we can get into those inquiries. And today, I always like to highlight a couple of the core principles that we're going to draw connections from today. Core principle number 5, practice of constitutional democracy and student agency. When we think about this, as we think about the games, as we think about those kind of simulations, really thinking about how are we engaging our students with experiences in and beyond the classroom that is really providing the students the opportunity to practice those skills, just like how you would go to a chemistry lab and practice and complete an experiment. We want to make sure that we're providing our students that space to test things out, to try things out and build those skills within the civics and history space as well. And when we think about what that looks like for teachers and students, understanding that teachers and students and school leaders all have a role in this work, that is essential to think about, because we want to make sure that it's not just a teacher standing in front of the room, but actually it's an opportunity for everyone to engage. The other core principle that I do want to connect us to today is that core principle number 6, assess, reflect, and improve. And as we think about assess, reflect, and improve, really thinking about how we are providing opportunities for our students to constantly think about what they're doing, thinking about what they're learning, thinking about how they're changing, whether it's their disposition, their knowledge, their skill set, because if we're not providing the time to stop, reflect, then we're just doing an activity, right? We have to make that connection and we have to help them make that connection. And for us, those formative assessments help us then continue to improve instruction as we continue with our content and with our lessons. That way, we're constantly going through this cycle so that we are using information with how our students are doing. We're not saying, let's go make more standardized tests, but actually thinking about how are you providing the space for an exit ticket, a conversation? How are you giving them that space to actually assess their knowledge and skills there so that you can then continue to improve their learning and improve lessons and instruction. Now, on this note, our first guest for the evening, which I'm so excited, Carrie Ray Hill, our Senior Director of Digital Learning at iCivics. I'm going to stop sharing my screen momentarily because Carrie's going to take over and share her screen. And we also have Charlie Hopkins, the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Council of Foreign Relations. And we are so excited to have them here today to dive in with this theme. You're going to be in great hands. As you're participating in the presentation, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. We will continue to keep track of them. And also remember, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. We're here. We're happy to be in community, but take care of yourselves as well. And on that note, Carrie, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay. I am struggling with the screen sharing at the moment. Let's see.
While Carrie's doing that, I'll just say how thrilled I am to join all of you today. Been a longtime fan of iCivics, and we were so happy to collaborate with iCivics over at the Council on Foreign Relations on this game, and we're really excited to come share it with you guys. There we go. That looks good.
Thank you for your patience. Your grace-filled place today. I appreciate it. Yes, we're super excited to have you. And so what we're going to do is give a little insights into what this game is, how it came to be, how it can support EAD and beyond, and kind of show you, almost like peel back the curtain a little bit to talk about some of the skills and stuff that you can also kind of think about when you think about simulations and games as well, because there's a lot of root opportunities that if you just know what you're looking for, you can see these connections as they pop. So I'm going to hand it over to Charlie, and he can get us going about why we made this.
Yeah, thanks so much. So quick word with the Council on Foreign Relations. We're a nonpartisan, non-governmental think tank. And one of the things we work on is helping folks understand how the world works. And we think of that as a kind of global civics. Then the reason why we think in terms of global civics is it's super important to know the difference between the role of president and the role of Congress. It's super important to know the Bill of Rights, but we also are living in a world today where some of the greatest challenges we face don't just pertain to a single country. We think about climate change is going to affect us all. And no one country is going to be able to address it on their own, right? We all share the same atmosphere. Pandemics, we've all had an object lesson in how something that happens in China can very, very quickly spread to affect the entire world. I think about cybersecurity. I know many companies and municipal governments are getting hit by cyber attacks. Almost all of them come from outside the country. There's literally nothing the FBI can do. It has to be a global approach. Migration is obviously a global issue. Global trade, like almost all trade is global at this point. And now we're seeing in Ukraine, wars cross borders as well. So students to live in this world, to meet many of the challenges that they're going to face as citizens, as adults in their careers, they have to understand how the world works. And if we can jump to the next slide, please. And this comes up everywhere. I really think civics and global civics are something that can pop up in a lot of different places. I mean, for sure, many of you may have sort of your global studies course, something like that. Certainly the civics course, we would advocate this is an important part of it. EAD thinks of it that way. But we come up with these kinds of issues in literature, in STEM classes, certainly in history classes. It's also the kind of thing that we find pops up in advisory or homeroom or however your school is organized. Because students, we all have those days. We're going to have one tomorrow morning where students come into school and they're full of whatever was on the news last night. And they want to talk about it. And so often there is a global component to that. I'm sure we all felt that back in February when students came in and said, where is Ukraine? Why is Russia invading Ukraine? What's going to be done about it? What's going to happen? All of that is part of global civics. So that's where the game comes in. We wanted to work together, and it's been a really wonderful collaboration with iCivics to help give students some of the tools and the information that they need to better navigate how the world works, and in particular, how the United States government goes about making foreign policy, deciding what to do in response to some of these global issues. And Carrie is the queen of games, so I will hand off to her to tell you a little more about what we did together.
Just realized I left my tiara at the office.
Oh, I didn't warn you.
That's all right. It's getting cleaned anyway. So we created Convene the Council. If you guys are familiar with our games, it's very much a situation where a student plays, they take on a role that most kids don't get to take on, which is like ruling the free world and or engaging with some pretty involved civic actions. So I think this is probably the 22nd game we've made at iCivics in total. It's very exciting, this partnership, as I said, as Charlie said, it's very exciting to be able to kind of lean on folks to who live this in real life, not just, researching textbooks and looking at, websites. I actually had foreign policy experts at my disposal, such power. And they were deeply involved with helping create the content, play testing, and all that stuff. Would you believe there's some game nerds in there hiding in the Council on Foreign Relations world? There are. So what we want to do today together is just to kind of get you in the situation room. That's what this game really does. It pulls you into a scenario where you're the president and you got a lot of stuff to do. You got a lot of hard decisions to make. And guess what? There is no guidebook. There is no cheat code as being the president. It's a hard job. And there are a lot of things you have to weigh. And that's something that's really kind of what I taught kids, really hard to get them to understand, is that they could list the powers of the president, they could list the cabinet members if I did my job right, but they truly appreciate the work and the skills needed to execute that well. And so we decided to throw the kid in the situation room. It's a term, right? There's a CNN show called The Situation Room. We hear that kind of in our common mode quite a bit, but what does it mean, right? What is the situation? What does the president need to do around that situation? So anytime we make a game, we have to decide what's not thrown into the kitchen sink. You guys have all probably had a lesson or an experience where you tried to do too much and it doesn't usually in a lesson, you cram too much in a day. We really try to keep a laser focus on what we think would work in a game. And so we really focused in on the following objectives. And if you play the game, you should, as a teacher, kind of see and hear these things come through in the gameplay. So international crises, strategic action, match them up, okay? To a degree, you got to figure out what happens and how your response is. Another big part of this is actually engage with the members of the National Security Council. They're in the situation room with you. They're the ones talking to you and talking you through your options, the pros and the cons, the goods and the bads. And guess what? They don't know what the right answer is either. They all come with their own opinions and their own backgrounds. You are presented with policy options that you have to weigh. Again, there's no right answer. There's maybe a better one and a worse one, but there's no right or wrong. Then once you figured out what you're going to do, you have to delegate those to the appropriate agencies and departments. This is a stealthy way of teaching kids the agencies and departments. It's not a huge part of the game, but it's a critical part because you can't ask the FBI or this national or the intelligence community to run sanctions. Doesn't make sense, right? So that's part of you hear about why Treasury is involved in some things or Homeland Security is involved in something else. And then you have metrics. And this is where I think a lot of like the EAD kind of, I don't know, heart is in the game, because these are metrics that have tension between each other, right? You don't do a move and everything goes up or everything goes down. You might make a choice that really increases the country's prosperity through a really interesting trade deal, but it's at the expense a little bit of our security. And it was kind of shady-ish from some people's perspective. So it kind of made our values wiggly. Or we did something that stood behind our values, but may not have helped the state of the world very much. And so these are the tensions. And this is what really gets at the complexity that a simple game might be hiding, right? Is that there's a lot of hard thinking and dealing to go with. So all of that does happen in the game. I could have listed 15 more learning objectives to try to hit, but we kept it simple, haha, with our game. So I'm hoping the audio comes through. I always have to hope that, because in our world of internets, it works about as good as it's going to work. So this is the trailer. I will preempt to say that it is available on YouTube. So check, if this doesn't work, I'm not going to fight it. We'll just move on because I have screenshots. I'll take a thumbs up. Okay. I'll narrate for you while it plays. So you're seeing scenes from the game. That's your National Security Council. Different people will be in the room based on the crises. You'll have a pop-up at various points. I think you have 8 issues, 8 turns to deal with. This one's a refugee crisis. You're going to hear from different folks, right? So the Secretary of State has diplomacy on his mind. The Attorney General has got like, what legal means are we able to work within? Homeland Security deals with the borders, obviously. And then you're actually presented with your options. This restates to a degree the pros and cons. You see the pluses and negatives there. And it also shows you the impact on your metrics above. That's a lot to look at, but once you get into the game, it feels a little bit smoother. You get to delegate who you're going to send your quote email to. This is your metrics. You always, each round, you find out your choices and what they did to your outcomes. And your legacy. It kind of shares, did you take risks? Were you low risk, low reward? Did your risks pay off or not? So there's a lot of different kind of meaty pieces of feedback you can receive during the game. And I'm going to try to get out of this so it stops playing. But anyway, you can go to the website or the internet on the YouTube and check it out. But this is actually a little slower here, so I'll walk you through this. So you can be in the council, National Security Council, as the president. You get to pick your own avatar too. So that's my too long of bangs president right there. And you work through these events and getting advice from the experts. So Anna, you're going to see there, she's actually your national security advisor. You may notice her from other games. She is your helper. She's the person who always pops up in your time of need or acts as your kind of director during games. And she's been a really great asset. Because this game also provides ELL resources. So it's translated into Spanish that you can play in Spanish. It also has an English voiceover for all the play critical content. So you actually hear these different people talking. And you can hear things over again. So this not only helps people who are learning and practicing and building their English skills because they're multilingual, but it's also helping folks that are English as an initial language, but maybe struggle to read or need help kind of seeing and hearing at the same time. So and then it has a support tool that also kind of acts as reference guide to help students or any player work through if they're struggling with reading. We also, because I know vocabulary is a big deal, we pull out academic vocabulary and have it glossed so you can literally hover over it and see what a contextual definition is. So these are all kind of elements of our games, but I just want to point that out as like really great assets that we've added as well. So once you've been discussed, right, and the advisors don't agree, you might have the Attorney General saying we should do this, and the Vice President be like, that's not going to be popular with the people, right? Because the VP kind of has a pulse on the politics of decisions, where the AG is only worried about the law, and the Treasury is like, that's going to be too expensive. So all of these tensions really come together, and you're left with this gray mess of what do I do? So here you have three options to deal with a country that is has some nuclear proliferation issues that we're not real happy about. And your choices, let's say here is a sanction, right? It's got a medium chance of success. So you've got a lot of things to weigh here. It is the most forceful option of the ones provided, and it could harm our interests. So it's got some drawbacks. And if you look on the top, the metrics, you see where those tensions come in, right? It's good for security, bad for prosperity, on values, and it does kind of help the world because we're trying to like denuclear weapons people. So there, you can kind of see those tensions. And if you were to flip through your policies, you'd see that maybe another one is 2 arrows up for one, 2 arrows down. So you got to really decide and look at your own metrics, right? So if you're a gamer or you play games or you just like to, look at cause and effect, those metrics being on the screen at all times really helps you look at what kind of administration am I running? Where are my priorities? If you let anything tank, it's not good. It's hard to do, but you could actually tank out on a couple of these if you try really hard. And guess what? If you are the kind of kid or player who likes to kill a game or try to break it, they learn just as much by breaking the game as they do by winning it. So just so you don't think you have to win to learn here. But anyway, you have all this stuff available to you to make your decision, and then you delegate. Now, granted, they do not send an email delegating a policy. This is the game world we're living in. And so what you do is you would read your policy that you've selected, pick which department it needs to go to. This is the one time where you can be right or wrong on things. You have an ability to cheat sheet to see what all these guys do specifically. So the kids will learn on a need to know basis. They're going to look, I don't know what Treasury does. And if they click on Anna, they're going to see, oh, the Treasury covers things like sanctions and funding and aid and things like that. So this is where you delegate. So we, can show that it's literally not the president going out and doing these things. It is the cabinet and the rest of the group. And then we have our friendly Midwestern newscaster, literally from Madison, Wisconsin. He was very friendly and a very good VO guy, and a teacher. And he will report how things went. But guess what? It would be fine if we said, oh, medium chance of success. We're going to tell you what we think is going to happen. It doesn't mean it's going to happen that way, right? The best laid plans of mice and men are in this game. So you could plan to do a thing and that thing may fail because forces outside of your control get involved, right? An aid package or a giant hurricane comes and squashes your convoy of aid supplies to an island nation or whatever, right? This stuff happens in the news all the time. So things that you think will succeed may, or they may not. And so that's where that risk and success chance comes in. Again, we're working with a gray area. Everything's not straightforward and things don't always go as planned. Those are all kind of elements of the real world that we try to bring into the game. Just a little bit of chaos, right? Just the right smidge of chaos to make the game fun, but also show that this is hard. I want to take a little bit step back from the game itself and talk about how we play games and how if you guys haven't thought about it or tried this, a little bit of pedagogy suggestion is that most people in most situations just assume one-to-one device, right? Me and a device, student to device, playing a game is a one-to-one setting. That's great. You get deep thinking, independent problem solving. You get to fail and experiment and nobody's over your shoulder hollering at you or saying, no, do this instead. So that's great. It totally works in that space. Pair play and small group is something that I have to say I came around to appreciating more after seeing it happen. Because a lot of times, oh, this computer is not, so-and-so forgot their laptop or this computer doesn't work, or I just don't have enough computers. And what ended up happening during play tests that I saw with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed otherwise, is that you have kids having deep, profound, ridiculous discussions about policy or about like whatever they have to do to play the game together. So it's not multiplayer in that way, but if they have to discuss and move forward as a unit, you will find, I've had teachers email me say, I cannot tell you the ridiculousness of these kids. They're having like deep and profound debates about, the value of sanctions during times of war. You know what I mean? Like blah, blah, blah. Like that wouldn't have happened without having to force them play together. Small groups are the same. They tend to get a little more dicey in that like the conversations might be more varied, but it really gets it compromising because they still just have one move they can make or one choice they can make. And then the whole class, that's another real life situation where you have a projector and that's what you got. And that's what you're working with. And so with the projector, you can put it up, and this game would work like this too, where you put it up. That's very nice. I'm sorry, I'm getting a paper airplane show. The idea is that you can talk through your choices with the kids and they can coach you, especially if you play like I'm not good at gaming, teaching me how to do this, kids, they love it. They want to eat it up. They want to tell you what to do. And then you can use that as an actual live discussion to go through. So that's just another pedagogical approach when you think about video games in the classroom or games in the classroom. There's lots of ways to go about it. And so don't feel that you're kind of stuck with just having kids mouth breathing into their screens. Good things happen there, but you can do so much more with it than that. In addition to games, we have classroom supports. This is also from hearing from teachers is that your game is great. How do we teach with it? It's a tool in your toolbox, right? So I'm providing more nails and hammers to help you really get this stuff home. So we have a game guide that's for teachers. It kind of shows this is what you should expect while you're playing. You should always play a game first, just like you should always watch a video first before you show it to your kids. Don't ask me how I learned that the hard way. It was when I was teaching. But play it first. But the game guide's also there to be like, I don't understand this part, or my kids are asking this question. It also comes with like pre and post discussion questions to kind of get the party started and to help wrap things up a little bit. The extension pack is that blown up a lot. We call it our game sandwich, where you've got a nice, soft, warm, toasty bun, the meat of the game, and then a nice, warm, soft, toasty bun at the end. I've gone gluten-free now, so I'm just going to talk about bread for another hour. But the idea is that we're packaging some pre-activities and some post-activities that let kids get the stage set for them and then have them carry on the learning afterwards and extend. So there's lots of great opportunities that I'll show you just in a second. We also provided a department guide. So if kids are like struggling with like who does what, whatever, it's a printable that you can give to them. And then a timeline history of the National Security Council. It's not been around forever. It's been involved in a lot of important decisions. And so that's just kind of a fun history tie-in if you want to bring that in as well. These are some examples of our sheets from the extension pack, our game sandwich. And so this actually, in this case, we do a lot of pre-teaching. You don't have to do it to play the game well, but what it does is it kind of gets at what kind of tools do they have? How do we do foreign policy, right? So we've got diplomatic, we've got domestic, we've got unconventional tools like espionage and like fun bond stuff. We have military, we have economic and diplomatic. If I said that one already, I don't remember. Anyway, and then there's also the no action option. You can decide to let this thing sit, right? So we kind of pre-introduce those things so the kids have a kind of a little bit more of a background to work from if you want to get that depth, right? We can hit the game and we're going to hit those ideas too, but this is bringing a little bit more intentionality to the party. And we also give a glossary that's printable as well. So there's just a ton of stuff and some really great discussion questions and additional resources that you can do after the game, because that also sets kids up for a lot of inquiry, right? A lot of questions, a lot of seeking. And it allows kids to also see the whole abstract and concrete. Right? We create this game space where they can like live in a place where things are concrete and real. And then you can kind of challenge them in abstract ways to go, okay, so that experience, what can we take in and find examples of in the real world? Or with this experience, where can we find parallels? And I tell you what, like you could literally assign the kids to play this game with a couple, 3 or 4 times to have all the situations pop up and ask them to go find the real world situation that's modeled after. Because all of these, as adults that watch news, you'll probably go like, oh, that's the Afghanistan pullout. Oh, that's the Iran nuclear, thing. We wanted to make it evergreen, so we took a lot of I don't say liberties. We took a lot of fictionalization opportunities, but those things are all real situations and those are real policy options that were put before the president.
Yeah.
Here's some more. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I just want to say there's also lots of Easter eggs if you're elder millennial or late Gen X, lots of pop culture references for all the fake country names that we use. So they're all fake countries because in an effort to not annoy any real countries, because some of these folks come out looking pretty bad, like they're trying to get nuclear weapons when they're not supposed to. So we put up that all on fake countries, but they come from like movies from the 80s and 90s. So you can keep an eye out for that.
You're welcome. It's not for the kids, it's for you guys. It's for you guys these games. The other fun thing that we have with the extension packs is that we don't just like keep it in history, right? So here, this actually asks you to go ask the kids to think about what's going on now. So this game launched within, I think, a week of the Ukrainian invasion. So I literally this is the assignment on the left, and I went to NPR on the right. And those stories were all there within like 5 minutes. And so asking the kids to do some media literacy work, to engage with real life situations, basic media literacy skills of who, what, when, why, where, and how, and then talk about the situation, the response, the tools, and kind of like see the connection from the game to the real world. Like there is no slow day in foreign policy. So there's always something to look at. And so that's another thing that you can find in extension packs. Connecting the dots. There's lots of dots. Like I could go cross-eyed looking at all the dots to connect. I apologize if this is all I got for you guys, but here are some things in my perusal of the docs, right, that really seem like a clear home run for the game connecting to EDI. And after this, we're going to talk a little bit more about stuff that Charlie also has on offer from the Council on Foreign Relations to continue to make these connections. But the national interest, right? Like that's one of our things, like the value, prosperity, and security of the United States, that's our national interest. And how does that live both in harmony and in tension with the world health, or with the state of the world, right? We're going to make decisions that hurt and help both at different times, depending on what the situations are. So that's real part of the game. Balancing justice and national interest, all those things, again, those are the tensions that the kids have to work through, whether they realize it or not. It's happening in the game. They're forced to do it. And pulling that out of them sometimes gives you aha experiences that you wouldn't get otherwise, because you're kind of letting them own the fact that they've already figured this out a little bit. Global issues that matter, like the things that pop up in the game, are pretty clearly things that we're invested in engaging with or knowing about, or do have impacts on us. That doesn't mean we act on them all the time. So we always, not always, but most of the time have a no action option, because that's critical, because sometimes we don't have to engage in every single thing, right? And sometimes we absolutely should. So it just depends on the kids' perspectives on that. The driving questions for high school, how should we exercise our power? What limits do we have? What are we bringing to the party when we do these actions? What are we basing it on? What kind of narratives might we use to explain our decisions? Asking the kids to think about which scenario was the hardest for you to solve in your mind, and how did you go about choosing it? That's a great debrief question after the game. And then how, again, should we consider the interests of ourselves and others, right? It's the whole interventionist versus isolationist. Those terms aren't really used anymore, but in history they have been. So where's that balance? I defer to Charlie on those words, but where do we pull in versus push out? And it's like a breath, right? We're kind of doing all of those things at the same time. It's just in what situation. So those are an example, again, of some points of alignment. I'm going to hand it over to Charlie real quick to do his stuff.
So if your kids play the game, do the pre and post activities, you've had a great 2, 3, 4 days, and they want more, or if you find yourself with more opportunities that you're wanting to talk about, more global civics topics in whatever classes you teach, or your colleagues need some ideas, CFR's got you covered. I wanted to share briefly a couple of other products that we have that we've produced for use in the classroom. The first one here is World 101. This is I should back up for a second. Everything is free that I'm going to talk about tonight. Everything is online. So you don't need to buy books, hand out papers. It's all for free. World 101 is our collection of free online multimedia explainers about global issues and international relations. So we take a look at some of what we call the global era issues. So some of those things I was talking about a little bit earlier, those things that affect all of us, climate change and so on, trade, cyber attacks. We also have a section on the regions of the world. We have a section on what we call how the world works and sometimes doesn't, which are some of the key concepts, things like what is sovereignty, what is multilateral, what does it mean to be multilateral, for example. We take a quick look at history through the lens of international relations. How do we sort of get to the global world we have today? And then we have a section on the making of US foreign policy. So if your kids you want to give your kids a short reading about what is the National Security Council, we've got that here, along with a number of other things. It's designed to be really modular. So our videos tend to be, 5 minutes or under. We have readings, and we rely on a lot of infographics. You can see some examples here. And it's all informed by the research and the work of fellows at CFR. Secretary Powell was a important figure at the council. He served on our board for a while. We've got a lot of folks who either work in government or are scholars, who are supporting all this as we try and help students get a better understanding of some of these basics. So great explainers, great way to either give students some background on a current event or dig a little bit deeper, kicking off point for deeper exploration. We also have model diplomacy, which is our simulation program. This is more build your own. There's not a whole game to it. Our pop-up cases are just one-page scenarios, putting students in the shoes of policymakers. So it's just a quick reading about a situation, typically something that's in the news right now. right? This one we have here is, sometimes we do historical ones as well. This is about a treaty that Ukraine signed in 1993 that Russia violated in February. And so it's a chance to go back and say, gosh, would you have done the same thing back in 1993? We also have full model diplomacy cases. If you want to do an entire simulation with students, they can research and read a case study, write a position paper, and the website will walk you through sitting around the table with them and really having a rich, real live discussion as they pretend to be members of the National Security Council. So it'll walk you through all that and provide you with a case study. It's a really great, if you've got some time for a real project-based experience, it's a lot of fun with high school students. So those are a few things we've got, and hope you'll check them out as well.
Yeah, I just also love to say that, like, I really do see community council as a jumping off point for foreign policy engagement. The modules, model diplomacy, all that good great stuff that CFR has are really meat and potatoes, man. Like, community or the appetizer. And that's our goal, is to kind of really get kids to go, ooh, this is interesting, or oh, what's more going on. And even if you don't have like a model UN kind of situation at your school, that's okay, right? Like, because there are ways to integrate kind of smaller experiences and interactives and conversations using both the game and the materials that we provide and that we link out to also. So if you go to the game page, there's a lot more at Council on Foreign Relations that we link to as well. And so props to Charlie and his team for making that stuff happen.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Charlie.
I'm gonna stop my screen.
That's awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to really dive deep and share those connections with Convene the Council and the Council resources from the Council for Foreign Relations. I'm going to give everyone just a minute to go back to our landing site for today, kind of do a little bit of processing, reflection, thinking about what really resonated with you and how you could see the resources that were shared actually start to connect to the work that you're doing in the classroom. Okay, so take a minute, think about that. That's always the hard part with virtual PDs. They're like, okay, next topic. Yes. No, stop, think, reflect, digest it just a little bit. And then I am going to, so I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then I'm going to go and introduce our educator voice for this evening. An educator, still in the classroom educator, where we've all been class educators. So. And for those of you who might need the landing site one more time, I'll put it in the chat for you today. And I was laughing as Carrie was going over the delegations. Still get some of them wrong. Still. They keep giving me the same one too, Carrie. I wonder why. Great, we have some really thoughtful ideas here on our site for today. I'm not going to share my screen just because we're going to jump right over to Shannon, but thinking about how it connects with their civics course, bringing the connection to tribal councils, local, state, federal units of government, and that correlation, that real context. I love that recommendation that Carrie was thinking, like, where do we see this in the real world? Sure, they're fake names, but when you read it, it kind of hits a little close to home. You're like,
And I have to add, I'm sorry, I'm just going through the questions in the chat because I can't see both. I would say middle and high school for sure. I think some savvy, I've had savvy 4th, 5th, and 6th graders definitely engage as well. A lot of it's just how you approach it and how you support the kids and like kind of the setup that you provide. So again, I'd play it first, you know your kids better than anybody, and I would execute on that. And it's a single player game. I'm still going through, but if I see any other questions in here, I'll make sure to answer them in the chat. Sorry.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie and Charlie. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Shannon. And Shannon, while I introduce Shannon, Shannon's going to share her screen. Thank you, Shannon. So Shannon, one of our amazing Educator Network members, iCivics Educator Network members, just has been really involved with EAD since the curation of resources. And I am so excited that she's here today. She's going to talk you through some of the resources and just give her the perspective from the classroom. And Shannon, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And don't have a heart attack. I just played with some of your slides. So to make it work, but thank you so much for that. And thanks for everybody for having me here. So one of the things that I am most proud of in my journey as a teacher is this new role that I have with EDI Roadmap. I am the teacher representative to the Implementation Consortium, which means what it means for all of us here is that there's never been a step along the way of developing EAD Roadmap where there haven't been teacher voices front and center, not just as a sort of after the fact, oh, by the way, we should talk to some teachers. I'm on the steering committee. It is my responsibility to make sure that there's always a teacher voice in the room when new things are being discussed, when improvements are being made, when next steps are being decided. And I get to come to great rooms like this and see how teachers are reacting to this work as we put it in field, and then take your voices with me back to those steering committee meetings and making sure that everything that is presented is usable by us. And so when Natasha asked me to join today, I was so excited because it gives me a chance to just talk about, all right, if you were excited by what you saw, how do you translate that into what we all do with our students every day in the room? And so there are two things that I just want to show you. So first of all, right, this EAD, Educating for American Democracy Roadmap website is not just the 3 documents that we already showed you, which is, why did this come to be? What are the broad organizing themes and principles, and what are the good teaching practices that back it up? But in fact, it is a, if I can just make this go ahead, there we go. It is a vast library of resources where you can find the tools that you need to actually make all these things happen, to help your students, to give them entry points or places where they can continue tackling these driving questions, interact with these thematic questions. So, if you hadn't come to a session like tonight, you got a place where you can go still to find Convene the Council if you've never seen it before, where you can see all the great resources that the Council on Foreign Relations has and so many other providers. And the great news is that it is searchable by all kinds of dimensions of implementing the roadmap. So if you needed to teach from a world history lens and you were in this theme that we've been discussing tonight, you can just search by that theme and narrow these well-curated resources down to things that address this theme. And so it's really easy for you to find what you need. If you're intrigued by something in the roadmap and you're just thinking, but how do I do that? We didn't leave you to figure it out for yourself. And this curated list of resources is the work of a huge team of educators bringing the best things that are already tried and true, classroom tested resources, and putting it all in one giant collection so that it's easy for everybody to find. So as an example, I'm going to actually go to the live site. Hopefully, did it switch screens? Every once in a while, Zoom does this thing where it doesn't change screens. Great. And just show you a few of the fun things you'd find. And I think Natasha alluded to this earlier. Be careful. Unless you have a very targeted thing you're looking for, if you decide to come in here and play, folks might not see you for a while because you're going to find so many exciting things and you're going to go down so many rabbit holes, but you will thoroughly enjoy yourself doing it. So I actually want to X out of this specific resource and just show you how that search tool works. Down here on the left side, right, you can pick what you're looking for. So for example, we have been playing in this theme of a people in the world. So if I check that off, I'm narrowing down the content to just those resources, right? And you can see, I'm sure you're seeing the names of providers that you're all very familiar with, right? The Annenberg Classroom, the National Archives, Facing History, SHEG. I mean, all these amazing providers that you have surely encountered in your work before. And if you click on any of them, it is going to take you to something that, first of all, I want to make sure I am in the wrong place now. Here we go. Let me stop sharing for a second. Why? There we go. The joys of share screen. You'd think we'd be better at this 2 years in, right? But it will bring you to a cover page introducing you to the resource so you can quickly scan and see, am I in the right place? Is this what I'm looking for? I saw earlier in the chat a question of how do we align these to our core curriculum requirements that we might already have, right? One thing you might need to align to is state standards, and it will tell you right up front here if this is a resource that the content provider has already aligned to your state standards, if that's something you need to know right up front when you're shopping for resources. So all these things have been taken into consideration, and I'm just going to strongly encourage you to come here and play because you're going to find lots of really exciting things that you're going to want to play with more. But I want to pivot away from resources and get back to just teaching strategies that you need to make this all work. So I'm going to use the rest of my time here to talk about the fact that what you just saw were driving questions that don't have any easy answers, don't have any set right answers or wrong answers. How do we grapple with that in our classroom? It's one thing to bring students in and say, I'm going to teach them this fact, this event that happened, this location on a map, but we want kids to get to deeper places than that, which means grappling with questions that not only don't have easy answers, but sometimes don't even have answers, right? We're asking them to start to understand their relationship to the enduring questions of American citizenship or participation in civic communities. And sometimes these are questions that don't have right or wrong answers, and that can get into scary territory for teachers. So I wanted to talk about how we use discussion in the classroom as a tool to get at the kinds of questions that these great resources aligned to this theme are going to bring up in your classroom. So I did not put this in one of Natasha's fabulous Padlets. I see. I know I'm gonna get a talking to later, I'm sure. But in the chat, if you would just, if I were to say these two words to you, discussion and debate, do you see a difference between those two words, and what is it to you? I love some of these comments I'm seeing, and I am seeing a common theme that I was kind of hoping for, which is discussion, right, can be a place where lots of different viewpoints come together. The point is to reach understanding, for everyone's voices to be heard, to ask questions, to learn new information. Whereas in a debate, there is, first of all, definitely opposition, right? There are sides to an issue, and there is often, at least perceived to be, an element of competition. At the end of a discussion, hopefully you have learned something new, considered something new, or left with new questions, but we expect debates to resolve with a winner, a winning idea, somebody who feels like their point of view won the day. And when you're diving into these types of driving questions where there aren't right or wrong answers, and what you're actually trying to do with that opportunity in class is to get students to deeper learning and deeper understanding, we want to try to steer away from the mindsets of debate and steer towards the mindsets of discussion. And there are a lot of different ways we can do that. I'm sharing with you the model we use at the school I teach in. We are a competency-based school, And so the skill of having a collaborative discussion with classmates is the type of skill we assess our students on. And I wanted to give you a few things to think about. So when we engage in discussion, or rather when we help our students engage in discussion in the classroom, there are three things we look for. And you'll notice that none of those items are who's right and who's wrong, right? So did you come prepared? Is your discussion or the things you're coming prepared in, having thought about it ahead of time, sought reliable sources of information, come prepared not just with facts and things that you want to share with the group, but questions you want to ask? The participation element is framed entirely around questioning, posing and respond to questions. And there's a reason posing questions comes first, right? Are you coming with an inquisitive mind? Are you coming with curiosity? Are you coming with an openness to listen? And then that most important piece, reflecting on new learning, right? The point of the discussion is to get to the end and be able to pause and say to yourself, what did I just learn? How did this conversation impact my thinking? Has it reinforced opinions I already had? Has it challenged opinions I had and caused me to maybe rethink where I came in here thinking? And it's super important when you engage in those discussions in class to make room for that reflection. It is in that moment of discussion isn't where the actual learning happens. It sets the groundwork for the learning, but the learning really happens when those who participated in the discussion sit back and think about what just happened. What did I hear? What caused me to have new questions? What caused me to question what I thought ahead of time? What am I walking away with thinking differently than where I arrived before the discussion started? And I was so excited because as I brought these indicators of proficiency in the skills of discussion to this slide here, I was thinking about our pedagogy companion, and to be honest, a good discussion reflects all 6 elements of this EAD pedagogy, right? And I would challenge all of you, when you have a chance to look at these and you're going to have a classroom discussion, think about how all 6 of these elements can contribute to the kind of discussion where the goal is learning and growth, as opposed to winning and making your opinion prevail. So excellence for all speaks to the fact that all voices are valued, not just the powerful voices, not just the academically successful voices, but the fact is that you define a successful discussion by how many voices were heard, right? Growth mindset, right? The point of a discussion is to grow, to come in acknowledging you don't know everything and don't have all the answers, and leave with more knowledge, deeper understanding than you came with. So winning isn't about, did your opinion defeat others? Winning is about, am I walking away with deeper understanding than I came here with? Right? The EAD ready classroom in school is all about civic behavior. And think about, do the discussions in your classroom model the kinds of discussions we want to see in civic life out in the world? Again, are all voices honored? Is it civil? Is it respectful? Are we practicing empathy for each other? Inquiry is all about driving our learning by questions, just like our discussions should be about more questions than answers, right? Driven by those questions. The practice of constitutional democracy, again, is all about things like civic friendship and modeling the type of world we want to live in, the type of civic community we want to live in. And then finally, that last step of assess, reflect, and improve. The point of a discussion is not to come in, stand fast where you were before the discussion even started and stay there. It's to ask students to think, what do I know and what do I not know? How can I get to learn more? Did this activity I just participate in help me to grow? And oh, by the way, if it didn't, how could I participate more differently the next time we have a classroom discussion so I get more out of it and so I facilitate the learning and understanding of my peers even more? So when you're getting students into these big questions, what do we do about nuclear proliferation? What do we do about climate change? What do we do about these problems that are so big they transcend international borders? And how do we figure out our place in relation to those issues? right? Engaging discussion in class is a great way to help students engage in that struggle with each other, to help each other struggle to the point of growth. And these elements of good pedagogy can really help you transform your discussions in the classroom from, yay, we're coming in for a debate and I'm going to win, to we're all coming into a discussion and we're all going to walk away knowing more. There are so many different opportunities to do this, and it isn't always just everybody sits in a great big circle or at their desks, raises their hands, and take turns speaking. One activity I wanted to share with you, and I know you have the slides, so you should be able to click on this link, but a simple activity that gets kids moving called Where Do You Stand? Actually, that link, thank you, Michael, is the link I have there. This is an example from Facing History, but you don't need a great big lesson plan to do this. Think of a question you're going to grapple with in class. Maybe it has sort of two extremes of answers. You can always go in more directions than two, but use your space in the classroom to say, okay, if you agree with this, you're going to stand closer to this side of the room. If you take the opposite point of view, you're going to sit at the far end of the classroom, right? Ask students to position themselves on a spectrum before the discussion starts. Where do they stand on the question you've asked? And then ask students to start sharing why they're standing where they're standing, which could include standing dead in the middle because I don't have an opinion yet. I don't know enough to have an opinion on this. And then every few comments, pause and ask your students if they want to move, right? Have you heard something that has caused you to change a little bit how strongly you hold the opinion you came in with or where you actually stand on this issue? And the beauty of this is it's not only engaging because it's a physical activity, but it rewards students for moving, right? It creates a reason for students to want to say, I'm starting to change my mind on this. I'm starting to rethink what I'm thinking. And it allows it values the movement more than it values standing pat where you are. Because when you get kids up and you tell them you're going to move, well, they want to move. So it opens their minds a little bit to the idea that as I bring in new information and new learning, my opinions should move. If they aren't, well, I didn't need to come to class today because I didn't learn anything when I came here today. So that's just one example of a way that you can encourage these values of showing students how new learning changes our mindsets and encourages them to take that sort of growth mindset with their own learning. And this can be so helpful, especially with these big multinational issues that don't have pat, easy answers. And students will always be growing their understanding. And I wanted to end my time with a little shameless plug for a new resource that came out of a very good friend to the iCivics Educator Network and somebody who's been very involved in the EDI Roadmap work, but it is a wonderful book, a new book on civil discourse, links to several different places, the booksellers of your choice. But Joe Schmidt and Michelle Pinckney give some great step-by-step instructions for teachers who aren't as comfortable facilitating discussions, especially when it comes to more difficult or perhaps controversial topics in your classroom. This isn't just a book about why you should have discussion, but it actually is a step-by-step roadmap to teach teachers how to facilitate these discussions successfully. And just like EAD itself, Joe and Michelle valued the voices of teachers so much that there's practically a chapter of educators talking about why they value this resource and how they will use it in their classroom and why other classroom teachers should read it. So I just wanted to share that with you because especially in today's environment, giving control over to your students and letting them have at it, having an open-ended discussion about issues, especially the more, controversial ones, can lead teachers to a place of great discomfort and fear. But there's a lot of support out there to help you do it, and you're just never going to get to the deepest understanding of these essential and enduring questions if you don't do it. So we can lean on each other through conversations like this and groups like this so that we can continue to do those things that we know are in the best interests of supporting deeper learning in our students instead of letting fear drive us away from diving into it. So thank you so very, very much for letting me talk into your ears for a few minutes tonight. Natasha, I think I'm going to give it back over to you.
Shannon, thank you so much. I think really what makes these sessions so powerful is when we have amazing educator voices here, because you're talking to people who, I mean, yes, we've been in the classroom ourselves, but talking to people who are in the classroom now, and it makes the world of difference. And I just appreciate your time, Shannon, and your collaboration and the fun. I'm always here for fun and collaboration. So as I close us out today with our final 4 minutes, I'm going to share my screen one more time. And those of you who have been doing a great job sharing your thoughts and ideas on the Padlets, please continue to do so. I always love when our educators and our partner organizations get some great feedback from you and what you're taking away from their sessions so that they can continue to grow as much as you're continuing to grow with your practice. Now, as I close out today, just a reminder, complete your exit ticket. You got 3 minutes to work on it while I go through the closing comments. See, setting it all up for you. So just keep that in mind. Feel free to do that while I'm talking over our closing remarks for today. One piece that I just love to close with is our ambitious goals for EAD. When we think about educating for American democracy, really thinking about how and why does this matter? Okay, why does this work matter? And when we think about that, 60 million students, 100,000 schools, and 1 million teachers. So that is basically every classroom, every student, every educator, giving our students this robust opportunity to engage in really rich history and civics instruction that is inquiry-based. So keeping that at the heart of why we do this and thinking about how can you continue the conversation when you leave here. Invite others to the table. Okay, take all the links. These links, that's why we have the landing site. These links are going to be here. Take them, share them with a partner tomorrow during lunch. Have a conversation, share them try one of the resources out with a student, convene the council with a student, with your students or as a whole class. Explore the resources. Definitely, that's like a good Saturday morning cup of coffee. I feel like clicking around, getting lost down the rabbit hole, but there's just so much amazing stuff on that website that has been vetted by educators, and it's just an amazing collection that's already aligned to the roadmap. And continue the dialogue. We have one more session. So this is a series of 8 workshops. This is workshop number 7. We have one more session that is going to be in a couple of weeks, and I'll give you that date and registration link in just a moment. But definitely continue. Well, there will be more workshops. There are always opportunities to engage. Unfortunately, I do lots of these, so you're stuck with me. That's not a bad thing. But we'll continue the conversations in lots of different settings. And our next session, June 15th, we're going to be looking at our final theme, theme number 7, and we're going to have our partners from Ken Burns Unum come join us and just share their great resources and dive into that, making those contemporary connections to those current events and debates. And on that note, perfectly at 8:30 on the dot, I just want to thank you and I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you for engaging in our conversation today. I know we started off really emotional, but it always brings me such joy and pleasure to do this work, to be surrounded by educators, to have amazing colleagues, Carrie and Charlie and Shannon in the field, and Michael, who's been my link master over there. But to have such amazing colleagues in the field doing this work, knowing that we are here to support you, to make sure that our students have access to amazing resources, and that you feel like you have the skills and just the opportunity to continue to bring back these types of discussions with your students. So know that we are all thinking about you tomorrow morning as you go into your classrooms, and we're here with you. And I'm so glad that we could take this time together. On that note, do your exit ticket, and I hope you all have a fabulous afternoon and evening. Thank you again so much for joining us. Take care, everybody. Shannon, Charlie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I was
So impressed with you ending right on the dot of the time that you're supposed to.
This
That's
is
a long time
Natasha's
teacher for you.
superpower. She is a wizard at this.